me get this straight. 2025 gave us peak single player, peak multiplayer, new Assassin's Creed, new Doom, new Borderlands, a great Souls-like, a groundbreaking roguelike, a masterful remake after masterful remake, a long-awaited sequel, and also a long-awaited sequel, with multiple other masterpieces sprinkled on top. If you somehow fall in the category of people that complain about not having anything to play, your entire issue might just be your taste, because last year had something in store for every type of gamer. My issue is that I happen to be every type of gamer, so I want to play everything, but there is not enough time in eternity to keep up with the insane release schedule. Damn, I'm on my DJ Khaled shit, suffering from success. To add insult to injury, Supergiant Games couldn't feel left out of the party and decided to fully release their own Game of the Year contender with Hades 2. Technically, this game has been out in early access for a while, but this was the official release, which I hoped would be further down the road because I wanted to put more hours into it to fully grasp the early access experience and see how the game evolves and takes shape with each update. But being so occupied with making so many videos about so many video games, Hades 2 has fallen into the backdrop after experiencing most of its content. I also have to contain myself because I can easily dump more hours into Hades 2 than all of the previously mentioned games combined. I have that type of personality. It is the sole reason I'm still keeping myself at a distance when it comes to Balatro. Anyway, Hades 2 has actually been my first early access experience, as I've never fallen in a game's hype pipeline to be pursued into buying an unfinished product. That being said, this only occurred because the first Hades managed to unapologetically secure its spot at the top of my favorite roguelikes list from the first moment I hit play, which is weird if I'm analyzing the situation through a smaller lens. Hades doesn't hold a candle to enter the gungeon when it comes to the creativity of the builds and the diversity of the runs, nor does it outshine The Binding of Isaac when it comes to being iconic. Returnal is prettier to look at, and Inscription completely flips the genre on its head. Taking all of these comparisons into consideration, it might seem contradictory for me to admit that I think Hades was the no-brainer pick when it comes to being Game of the Year back in 2020, but I guess I'll go fuck myself and live in a world where this piece of shit not only beat Hades, but Ghost of Tsushima and Doom Eternal too. Don't mind me, I'm just being a hater for very valid reasons.
Scoreboard! Scoreboard! Oh, what happened to your friend? Hey, I know that guy. I kill him. He cried like a bitch.
Anyway, I think Hades has two strong qualities that make it stand out in this oversaturated genre. The first one is the polish. When I'm telling you that I don't care about the graphics of a video game, but I do care about how the game looks, I'm referring to the polish of the game. Does it look smooth? Does it look crisp? And more importantly, does it look stable and functioning? You can be the least superficial gamer out there, but you cannot tell me that the presentation of a video game is not its main selling point. If your game doesn't look like a premium product, your brain will subconsciously not perceive it as such. It's the Apple way of psychology. Let's stay in the genre, and let's take Risk of Rain as the perfect example for my argument. You can say whatever you want about how fun the game is, I will never be into it purely based on how it looks and plays. It's very creative when it comes to its gameplay loop, but when it comes to its presentation, it looks rough around the edges, almost resembling an unfinished early access state. Moreover, the same feeling translates to the gameplay part as well, as I've seen many runs end horribly as the game just breaks from all of the chaos created by the limitless scope. You can quote me on this, but I don't think it's a fun experience when your game breaks on you. Even the goats of the genre are not safe from this problem. How many times have you accidentally killed your run in Isaac by picking up the wrong combination of items or soft-locked your game? Supergiant Games, not to confuse them with Supermassive Games. Why the fuck do these studios have such similar names whilst making completely different types of video games? Anyway, Supergiant focused on creating a beautiful presentation for Hades, which also translated in the gameplay. The radiant visuals and the vibrant art style just hook you from the get-go, and the smooth gameplay makes you want to stay and go for another round over and over again. Hades knows to impose limits when it comes to the different variations of builds you can create, because it makes the entire experience more more coherent and stable, as the only thing that can kill you a run is your skill level. The movement is silky smooth, as every button prompt results in an immediate response, creating a fast and challenging flow of the game. Your weapons beautifully snap together with the boons, which go tremendously against the enemy design, which perfectly complements the gorgeous arenas. Basically, all of the elements that constitute the sauce of the game were designed in tandem with all of the others in mind in order to create a cohesive, complementary, more importantly a polished presentation. Moving on from how the game looks and feels, Hades managed to do something with the roguelike genre which I personally never even considered to be a possibility. It made me care about the story and, more importantly, the characters. I don't know about y'all, but I don't necessarily play roguelikes for the narrative aspect. I like the genre for offering me an endless and satisfying gameplay loop with the focus of letting me curate my own personalized experience during each attempt. That being said, when I'm playing Hades, I'm actually less interested in coming up with a crazy build for my next run and more into having intercourse with everybody on screen. Bro, this game is the peak of bisexual awakenings when it comes to video games, and I'm not even bisexual. Why is everyone so goddamn hot? Not only hot, but very well written as well. There are so many characters in this game, and somehow each one of them has a distinct personality that shines through in their extensive dialogue. For real, even after 100 hours, there is still more dialogue to uncover, and because it is so well written, you get invested into the story of each one of these characters. Some have tragic backstories like Achilles and Patroclus, some are put there only to annoy you like Hypnos, and some have been created with the sole purpose of getting you bricked up like Thanatos or Dusa Megara. I meant to say Megara. As you progress your way through the story, you get to learn more and more about these people, how they ended up in hell and what keeps them there. You create deeper bonds through the gifting mechanic of the game, as Hades actually incentivizes the player to interact with this gameplay aspect, as it greatly benefits the roguelike section, because your assortment of keepsakes constantly grows as you befriend more and more gods.
Lord Ares.
Destroy my enemies, and my life is yours.
Hades is basically a roguelike with a built-in dating simulator, and even though there are plenty of personal stories which will grab your attention, the main narrative of the game will keep you pushing through all of the struggles you will face, as your goal is to escape the underworld and beat up your father who is keeping you away from your mother. Hades is also very realistic and relatable in some departments, despite being a game centered around mythology. Moreover, the titular character, Hades, is also a well-rounded villain, as his motivations are believable, creating a satisfying battle of perspectives between him and Zagreus, the protagonist, which reflects their actual physical conflict. In The Binding of Isaac, there are more than 20 characters, but technically they're all Isaac, so you only get to care for him. In Hades, by the end, not only will you care even for the villain as his bond with his son evolves, but you will still be excited about encountering all of the less important characters thrown to the side, even after you have run into them countless times. And that's because they are all brought to life and made likable through the excellent writing of Supergiant Games. This developer managed to create what I consider to be the pinnacle of roguelikes by refining the game's presentation through its stunning visuals and an easy to understand yet hard to master gameplay loop, all without sacrificing the narrative aspect in the process. Coming from a developer that is famous for not doing sequels, you would think that Supergiant would take their W's and move on to the next big thing, but it turns out that they were not done with Hades. Following up your most successful release with an immediate direct sequel after establishing a pattern of avoiding sequels would make anyone feel suspicious and concerned that Hades 2 might just be a filthy cash grab, because we all know that a very popular type of sequel is the needless one. AAA companies love pumping out unnecessary follow-ups in order to bring back their franchises from the dead by marketing their games as a return to form or capitalizing on the popularity of their IP and milking every penny out of them. Some needless sequels have the ambition of adding more depth to their franchise, but they still end up doing more damage by extending a story that already had a conclusion. On the bright side of the spectrum, there is another spectrum for good types of sequels. Continuations which do the simple thing of adding more content, so the player keeps being entertained by the same gameplay loop from the previous entry, whilst also having extra stuff to do, so they don't get bored. This works through the simple premise of it ain't broke, don't fix it. There are also sequels which would rather improve the quality of their ingredients instead of adding more stuff to the plate. I'm talking about refining the small things in order to make the gameplay feel smoother, the visuals more breathtaking, and the characters more believable. It's about creating a rich and flavorful experience rather than sizing up the portion. You know, quality over quantity. And then there are sequels who completely change the trajectory of the franchise by getting rid of everything that made the previous installments iconic, with the risk of scaring away their fanbase, or with the potential of completely innovating the series. You can either go big or go home with this approach, but I think it's still commendable either way. There are brilliant video game sequels which perfectly fit into each one of these categories, so there is no right answer when asking the question, what makes a sequel perfect? But sometimes, once in a blue moon, the stars align and we get installments which somehow manage to check all of the previously mentioned boxes, bringing up all of the industry standards to a whole new level. That's Elden Ring for you. Imagine trying to make another Souls-like when this beast stares at... Oh, wait a second, this video was supposed to be about Hades 2. My bad, yo. Well, referring to the spectrum of sequels, or SOS for short, Hades 2 firmly stands around here. What can I say? It's more Hades, but everything is just 10 times better. It doesn't really change the structure of the first game, so it's not that innovative, but it's a lot more fun. Look, I know what you are going to say. How can Hades 2 be a perfect sequel if it doesn't check the final box? Well, I never said that a perfect sequel has to check all three. I can make the argument that when a game strays too far from the original structure, it's not necessarily a sequel anymore, but a reboot or just another game in the same franchise. You may add a 4 to your title and still have evil residents as the main antagonist, but putting these two games side by side, can you tell that one follows up the other? In my opinion, a perfect sequel can master any one of these criterias, and in our case, Hades 2 takes everything that made the original game great, turns the hit up to 11, and then doubles everything. It's more and it's better in all the ways that you could think of. So let's structure this video the same way. When I'm telling you that Hades 2 is more Hades, I'm emphasizing this fact in a literal fashion. Supergiant Games made a sequel to Hades and then decided that was not enough content, so they made Hades 3 and slapped these two games together and called it a day. Hades 2 is basically two games into one, because there are two fully developed, indistinguishable paths which you can take when you start your run. In Hades, you started each attempt in Tartarus, climbing your way out of hell by going through all of its unique layers. Hades 2 puts you on the surface level from the very beginning, and gives you the option of descending, which turns the pacing of the first game on its head, and it also introduces a new path that goes even further up, ascending the iconic Mount Olympus. At first, you might think that descending back into hell might be a cop-out in order to reuse assets from the first game. If that was the case, you would still get a lot of bang for your buck, because you would receive a game and a half for the price of one. But no, they actually went the extra mile, and not only created brand new areas and enemy types, but whenever they revisited old ideas from the first game, they made sure to revamp the entire concept until it was unrecognizable. They turned the fields of Elysium into actual open fields, designed for sprawling fights with large hordes of enemies that can be tackled in any order, which also contains side rewards now. Nothing is recycled when it comes to Hades 2, the developers basically completed their original vision. The same thing can be said about Mount Olympus, as this whole new path differs from the other one in every possible way, giving you an entirely different experience. When criticizing the first Hades, a valid point resonated with many players, and that's the repetitive nature of the gameplay loop. Compared to other titles in the genre, Hades surprisingly downscaled its boss department, as it only contains 4 main boss fights with a couple of mini-bosses thrown to the side. They do have an alternate version, but the fights mostly stay the same, so you have to go through all of them every single run, therefore the cycle might get tedious at some point. Hades 2 completely solves this issue with the Olympus path. Indeed, a better solution would have been to make more bosses to cycle through, but now you can alternate paths whenever you might get rid of facing the same foes over and over again. As I've already mentioned, you basically get 2 games for the price of one, as each path brings out their own unique enemies, areas, helpful characters, bosses, and even game mechanics, whilst maintaining the challenge even across the board. I might be lying about the last part, because the Olympus path whooped my ass so hard during early access that I thought Ares was going to be the final boss fight of the region, expecting the whole thing to be a smaller side part of the game. But these bastards not only added Prometheus, who I consider to be harder than Kronos, the final boss from the regular path, but they also added Typhon after that, which is the most grueling fight in the entire franchise. As you can see, when adding more stuff to the sequel, Supergiant Games didn't hold back when making the game harder, as the first path of Hades 2 completely obliterates its predecessor in the difficulty department, and it somehow represents the easier first half of the game. But let me clarify this, the increased difficulty is not a criticism of the game, nor it should be for any game in my opinion. I've seen this argument plague too many communities, so I couldn't let it slide here. Making the game harder is not only a logistical argument for game development, but it's also how you handle balancing, considering how many extra boons were added in the game. To put into perspective how much more content has been added, the first Hades had a roster of 10 gods to help you out on your journey. Hades 2 on the other hand still has the same 10 gods on speed dial, however, Apollo joins the party, and Hephaestus, Hera, Aestia, Selene, Hades, Arachne, Narcissus, Echo, Medea, Circe, and Icarus. If you couldn't count, that's 10 plus 12, 22 gods, each one providing you with a different pool of boons which you will need to defeat a pool of goons, and not those types of goons. They once again took all of the content from the previous game and doubled it in order to enhance the versatility and replayability of the experience. There are so many diverse combinations of boons that result in overpowered builds which still don't hold a candle to Prometheus. You are constantly incentivized to mix and match these boons in order to discover weirder combinations, making the life expectancy of the game much longer as there is more stuff to experiment with. More gods means more boons, but also more keepsakes, which also add more spice to the already flavorful assortment of tools. One splash of criticism that needs to be added to the mix is how some gods / side characters are constricted to specific paths. For example, Icarus can only appear on the Olympus path, while Hades is stuck, well, in Hades. It is lore friendly to be fair, the bastard cannot fly in the underworld, but it still makes the game a little bit more limited and predictable, as you know what's to be expected on each path. Supergiant did add more stuff, but there is an asterisk next to it. Let's be honest, adding more content to a game can only increase the quality of the sequel so much until you run out of steam. You need to focus on changing stuff as well in order to keep things fresh and bring the experience to a whole nother level. Take the boons for example. In case you hadn't noticed, I love saying the word boon as it sounds funny, but I'm scared that after saying it so much, I'll summon the actual Benson Boone himself. Anyway, not only did Hades 2 double the boon catalog, but they tweaked things here and there to make the experience different, which consequentially also makes the game better. Look, I know that the original structure of the video was going to focus on the increased volume and quality of the content added in Hades 2, but I feel that some people might prefer the original when it comes to specific elements, as Hades 1 was more straightforward in a lot of ways. So instead, I want to focus on the different changes made along the way and make the argument that these changes make Hades 2 a superior product and a perfect sequel. Let me get back to my boon example for a quick second. Take Aphrodite for instance. Her original goons, I mean boons, made the player inflict weak damage upon enemies, which is once again lore friendly, cause you know damn well she's making everybody go weak in the knees, but it's also not that interesting and a weak status effect in my opinion, no pun intended. Well, Hades 2 opts out of the lore friendly bracket as it changes her boons to make you do more damage at close range, and we know damn well the ability to do anything decreases astronomically the closer you get to this thing. That's one mere change that makes you want to chase Aphrodite, not driven by lust, but by the fact that she makes your melee builds much stronger. And who wouldn't want that when the new catalog of weapons is already super strong? That's one aspect of the game where Hades 2 completely moves on from its predecessor, as there is no weapon from the first Hades that shows up here. Well, technically there is one, as Iris uses the adamant rail against you, but there are none which you can wield as your own. I'm not complaining about this aspect, as these new weapons completely overshadow the arsenal from the original game. Just to give a couple of one-to-one comparisons, if the sword from the first game was your starting basic melee weapon, the axe from Hades 2 gives the ability to inflict tons of damage at the cost of slower attacks, increasing your vulnerability. You can opt for glass cannon builds or even tank builds and eat up all the damage. The sister blades combine the fast-paced gameplay of the twin fists with the agility and maneuverability of the spear, as you get to close the gap as fast as you can reposition. I can keep going about the other weapons, but I think they're truly a net improvement over the previous ones because they offer a more interesting and diverse gameplay. That's why I said that I think Hades is a bit more straightforward than its sequel, because I believe that Hades 2 is a bit more complex in this department, from the new gameplay mechanics to the new movement, but especially from the new mana system. It's called Arcana, but it basically functions like a regular mana system. It is used to empower your regular attacks and for Celine's ultimate. Yeah, Hades 2 introduces the concept of ultimates. Am I dumping too much information at once? For starters, every weapon has two main functions, a basic attack and a special of sorts. Both can be enhanced by using Arcana, adding two more abilities to your moveset, therefore unlocking even more variety when it comes to creating your build, as specific boons will directly affect these overpowered attacks. Celine's boon replaces the companions from Hades 1, as she offers the player the ability to pick between various ultimate abilities. These can be either very powerful, costing more Arcana, or very flexible, costing less. Either way, this represents yet another layer of versatility, as you can center your build around these ultimates, which can be upgraded through each encounter of Celine. The character progression system has also been revamped in the form of Arcana cards, allowing you to mix and match various cards in order to set up your character in various ways. It feels very familiar to the mirror in the first Hades, whilst also being a refreshing change from numbers on a screen that makes the progression less linear and more flexible. As you can see, every tweak and each addition serve only one purpose, that is making Hades 2 an extensive sequel that focuses on giving the player all of the agency that they need in order to approach the game however they want. Unless we're talking about the story, because that's the only part of Hades that stays the same for everybody. The narrative was the glue that held the entire structure of the first game together, elevating it over basically the entire roguelike genre. Now, this is a whole different story when talking about our quote-unquote perfect sequel, as the narrative in Hades 2 is practically the only inferior part of the game. Objectively, it's not bad, it's just not as strong. Hades, the game, basically managed to score in each department when telling a compelling story. Hades, the person, was an interesting villain with a convincing motivation, and his relationship with his son Zagreus kept the momentum of the narrative going. Hades, the place, was filled with a diverse cast of side characters that immersed the player even more through their tragic backstories, and the comedic tone of the game still managed to shine through the excellent dialogue. In contrast, Hades 2 didn't hit all of these strikes. Despite bringing a lot of old characters back and bringing in some new faces, the current roster doesn't feel as connected or enthralling. Replacing Achilles and Patroclus with Odysseus and Nemesis feels like trading the Brothers of Destruction for the Judgment Day, but maybe Christopher Nolan will change that perspective. I don't know, man, the performances are still on point, but I'm just not finding myself laughing, crying or gooning at these characters the same way I did back in Hades 1. Their aura isn't as intense, and I think that's mostly due to the biggest change between installments, that is Melanie. Switching up the protagonist in the sequel can only lead to interesting possibilities, and in our case, swapping out Zagreus for Melanie practically changed the tone of the game, as she is far more nonchalant and mysterious than he was. Melanie is a great protagonist, don't get me wrong, and an appreciated change of tone, but I think she mellows down the action a bit. Or I'm just tired of revenge plots. because yeah, that's pretty much the plot of the game. In spite of Melanie also being an heir of Hades, the focus of the story doesn't fall on this family's tumultuous dynamic anymore, but on a quest to defeat Kronos after he broke the family apart. The back and forth between Melanie and Kronos isn't as deep and profound like the one between Zagreus and Hades, but the story really picks up when Melanie actually gets to interact with her family members and worlds start colliding. So in the end, there's really no weak part when it comes to Hades 2. Let's be honest, it is a complete package. Did I also mention that they also added farming and resource management and also pets? Look at the kitty. And now look at the frog. Whilst Hades 1 has cemented its place as a classic in the independent landscape, Hades 2 showed me that even perfection can be improved. It is everything I would have ever wanted for a sequel. It improves the original formula whilst also adding more sauce to the bottle and keeping the price the same. The game's biggest strength is also its biggest weakness, as the entire experience feels like a repetition of what made the original one great, but at the same time, Hades 2 expands on everything in such a remarkable way that it renders the original game obsolete, defining the peak of the roguelike genre. Hades 2 is what Hades 1 could have been and much more. The gameplay is fine-tuned to perfection, the build variety goes bonkers, you got farming, the boss fights kick ass, the music consensually grabs you by your private parts. When talking about what makes a sequel perfect, this graph is irrelevant, although I am proud of making it. You can always add more stuff to expand on your original vision, or tweak different elements to further improve the product, or even switch things up entirely. But unless you do it with love, you won't be able to craft the perfect sequel. Yeah, I guess love was the answer this entire time. We might need to go back to expecting the most expected from now on. No, but for real, what makes Hades to a perfect sequel is how you can feel the love the developers put into fulfilling their vision. It does feel like more Hades 1, but it also feels like the developers made this game from scratch, trying to create a better experience in every single way. After you play Hades 2, you almost kind of don't want to go back to the original game, if only for nostalgic purposes, because you'll get used to so much more content that you won't want to give it away. The same passion that led to the creation of the original masterpiece turns out to be the same passion that leads to its replacement. Hades 2 does the exact same thing that Hades 1 did, defining a genre and becoming the ultimate roguelike experience that will inspire future masterpieces. Hades 2 is just Hades once again. I've just explained sequels to you. Thank you for listening. Your presence has been priceless. Take care.